In September 1940, a gale-force storm ripped across the English Channel. It tore loose a group of massive British barrage balloons, drifting them helplessly across the North Sea. To the British military, this was an embarrassing accident. To the Germans, it was a nuisance. But to Winston Churchill, it was a revelation. Within hours, reports arrived that these runaway balloons had knocked out power lines in neutral Sweden and Denmark. Someone in Whitehall realized that a few loose balloons had just achieved what entire squadrons of heavy bombers struggled to do. They destroyed enemy infrastructure without dropping a single bomb. This accident birthed Operation Outward, one of the strangest and most cost-effective weapons of World War II. While the Royal Air Force spent thousands of pounds to risk a Lancaster bomber and its 7-man crew every night, the Royal Navy began launching surplus weather balloons costing just 35 shillings each. That is less than 2 pounds. This is the story of how a cheap rubber bag and a roll of piano wire humiliated the German Luftwaffe, caused millions in damage, and forced Nazi engineers to destroy their own power grid in a panic.
Welcome to Churchill's Toy Shop.
To understand why business resorted to balloons, you have to understand the brutal mathematics of 1941. Strategic bombing was failing. RAF Bomber Command was losing aircraft and crews at unsustainable rates. A heavy bomber like the Lancaster required a highly trained 7-man crew. Lose the aircraft, and you lost years of navigational expertise and combat experience that no amount of money could replace. Precision bombing at night was beyond the technological capability of the time. Navigation systems could rarely place bombers within miles of their targets, let alone hit specific power stations. Meanwhile, the German electrical grid was a tempting target. It relied on thousands of miles of high-voltage transmission lines stretching across the countryside. Unlike factories, which were heavily defended by anti-aircraft guns, these lines were exposed and vulnerable. But hitting a thin wire from 10,000 feet at night was impossible. Britain needed a weapon that could attack these lines without risking a single pilot. When Churchill saw the reports of the accidental balloon damage in Scandinavia, he issued a characteristic memo to his war cabinet. "We may make a virtue of our misfortune." The idea was championed by Captain Gerald Bannister of the Boom Defense Division, but he faced stiff resistance. The Air Ministry hated the idea. They worried that free-flying balloons would collide with their own RAF bombers. But there was also a cultural objection. One Air Ministry memo famously objected on the grounds that attacks of this nature should not be originated from a cricketing country. It was seen as unsportsmanlike, a dirty trick. But with Britain fighting for survival, gentlemanly rules were discarded. The Chiefs of Staff finally approved the operation in September 1941. The weapon system they developed was elegantly simple. They utilized standard Royal Navy meteorological balloons, 8 feet in diameter. The Admiralty had 100,000 of these surplus balloons sitting in warehouses, preserved in French chalk. They were useless for weather reports, but perfect for sabotage. When filled with hydrogen, each balloon could lift about 18 pounds. This allowed for 2 specific types of payloads. The first was the incendiary. These came in 3 flavors: socks, which were canvas bags filled with wood wool and wax, beer, which were bottles of self-igniting phosphorus, and jelly, cans of incendiary fluid. These were designed to land in forests and start fires. But the real killer was the second payload, the wire. This consisted of 700 feet of hemp cord attached to 300 feet of stiff steel piano wire. The physics were simple. As the balloon descended, the wire would drag across the German countryside. When the steel piano wire contacted a high-voltage transmission line, it would bridge the gap between phases. Trials proved that this would initiate a massive electrical arc capable of spanning 15 feet. The heat would melt the aluminium conductors and destroy the transformers instantly. The operation was run from 3 golf courses along the English coast, with the primary site at Felixstowe Ferry Golf Club. To keep it secret, the site operated under the cover of a naval establishment called HMS Beehive. The workforce was predominantly female. Of the 233 personnel at each site, 140 were members of the Women's Royal Naval Service, known as WRENs. Working in canvas tents, they inflated the balloons with hydrogen. It was dangerous work. Static electricity could trigger an explosion at any moment, so water was continuously sprayed on the latex to prevent sparks. Personnel wore flash jackets, hoods with copper gauze face panels, and fireproof gloves. Despite the danger, the WRENs maintained a dark sense of humor. They reportedly wrote rude messages to Hitler on the uninflated balloons, which would expand to become huge billboards as the balloons rose. Their unofficial theme song, sung while launching incendiary balloons, was "I Don't Want to Set the World." On March 20th, 1942, the launches began. But the most devastating strike occurred on July 12, 1942. A single balloon, costing 2 pounds, drifted near Leipzig and snagged its wire on a 110 kilovolt transmission line. The resulting phase-to-phase short circuit was something German protection systems were not designed to handle. At the nearby Böhlen power station, a massive 16.5 megawatt generator was thrown out of synchronization. The physics were catastrophic. The generator began to vibrate violently. The rotor shaft bent under the torque, smashing into the fixed stator. This triggered an explosion and an uncontrollable fire that completely destroyed the power station. The damage was estimated at £1 million, not including the value of lost production. German records confirm that between March 1942 and January 1943 alone, there were 520 major disturbances on high-voltage lines. In occupied France, nearly 5,000 power interruptions were documented. The cost-benefit ratio was insane. One naval report concluded that the program inflicted damage equivalent to the loss of a capital ship achieved with weather balloons. But the genius of Operation Outward wasn't just the damage it caused directly. It was how it forced the Germans to react. The Luftwaffe was forced to dispatch fighter aircraft to intercept individual balloons. Pilots found the balloons frustratingly hard to shoot down. They drifted silently at altitudes that required significant climb time. Each hour a Messerschmitt spent chasing a rubber bag was an hour not spent defending against real bomber raids. The fuel and ammunition costs vastly exceeded the value of the balloons. But the greatest success was a spectacular self-own by German engineering. A high-ranking Nazi engineer designed a new transmission line clamp intended to release the power lines safely if a balloon wire snagged them. Over 1 million of these clamps were manufactured and installed across the entire German grid. But the design was fatally flawed. It turned out that normal wind and ice loading would trigger the release mechanism. The heavy clamps themselves snapped the conductors, causing widespread blackouts where no balloons were even present. Due to the engineer's political position, it took months to admit the mistake. The Germans had effectively sabotaged their own power grid, trying to stop the British balloons. The effectiveness of Operation Outward becomes even clearer when compared to Japan's attempt at the same concept. In 1944, Japan launched the Fugo balloon campaign against North America. But the Japanese approach was over-engineered. They used sophisticated paper and rubberized silk balloons with complex barometric altitude control systems. They were expensive technological marvels designed to cross the Pacific Ocean. Yet, out of 9,300 launched, only a few hundred reached America. The results were minimal. Fugo killed 6 civilians, a woman and 5 children on a picnic in Oregon. It caused no significant infrastructure damage. Britain, by contrast, launched nearly 100,000 balloons. They used simple, off-the-shelf components. They spent almost nothing, and they paralyzed the industrial heartland of their enemy. Operation Outward ended in September 1944, not because it stopped working, but because the Allies were advancing so fast they didn't want to hit their own troops. Post-war assessments confirmed damage of at least £1.5 million, a massive return on a total program cost of just £220,000. It proves a lesson that military planners often forget. The most effective weapon is not always the most expensive one. Sometimes it is a weather balloon, 35 shillings worth of latex and hydrogen, drifting silently across the North Sea to cripple the enemy's infrastructure without a single bomb. British engineering wasn't about building the biggest or the most sophisticated. It was about solving impossible problems with whatever was available. That is the essence of ungentlemanly engineering. If you enjoyed this story of how Britain weaponized the wind, make sure to subscribe and like the video. Next time, we will discuss how the SOE decided that the best way to destroy a German boiler was to stuff a dead rat with plastic explosives. You don't want to miss that.